It was supposed to be a simple Saturday lunch, nothing special. Just a quiet meal before I went back home to finish a few errands. The kind of ordinary day where you don't expect anything in your life to change. We were sitting in a small Italian place near the Riverwalk in Sacramento, California. Warm bread on the table, soft restaurant noise around us, sunlight coming through the front windows. Across from me was Ethan, the man I had been with for almost 4 years. I was halfway through my pasta when he set his glass down and looked at me like he had been waiting for a moment. Then, in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, he said, "I don't want to marry you anymore. The wedding is off." The restaurant went strangely quiet, not completely silent, but enough that I could feel the shift. Forks paused. Conversations dropped. People noticed. I stayed still for a second, my hand hovering over the plate, as if my body needed time to understand what my ears had already heard. Ethan had asked for this table by the window when we arrived, and only then did I realize why. At the table beside us sat 3 of his friends, not close enough to pretend it was coincidence, close enough to watch everything clearly. I felt their attention like weight. My name is Claire, and I was 28 years old. Something settled in me in that moment. Not panic, not heartbreak, just a quiet recognition. I placed my fork down gently. Ethan was watching my face with an expression I had seen before but never named properly. A kind of expectation, like he was waiting for something to begin. I took a breath. Then I said, calmly, "Thank you for telling me directly." His eyebrows lifted slightly. That wasn't what he wanted. Slowly, I reached for my left hand and slipped the engagement ring off. The one he had given me at his parents' formal dinner 2 years earlier, in front of an entire room of people. An audience, again. I placed it into my coat pocket. Ethan's mouth tightened. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. "I did," I replied. "I heard you." His friends shifted in their seats. I could tell they were waiting for something louder, something emotional. But I wasn't going to give them that. I reached for my water and took a slow sip. Then I said, almost to myself, "Honestly, I think this deserves a small celebration." One of his friends let out a short laugh, like I was confused. Ethan's face held the smallest hint of satisfaction, like he thought I was unraveling without realizing it. "A celebration?" he repeated. "Yes," I said evenly. "Not today, but eventually." He leaned forward slightly. "Claire, this is serious." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm grateful you chose to be honest now instead of later." The words felt calm coming out of my mouth, almost too calm for the moment. I pulled my wallet out, placed cash on the table for my portion of the meal, and added more than necessary for the waitress. Then I stood. Ethan's voice sharpened. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" I looked at him for a moment. "I think you planned this," I said quietly. "The table. Your friend's sitting right there. The timing." His expression flickered. "I thought you deserved the truth," he said. "And I got it," I answered. "More than you probably meant to show." I nodded politely toward his friends. They weren't smiling anymore. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I walked to my car with steady steps, unlocked the door, and sat down behind the wheel. Only then did I exhale. My hands weren't shaking, my eyes were dry. What I felt wasn't devastation, it was clarity. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A message from my closest friend, Marissa. "How was lunch?" I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "The wedding is canceled. I'll explain soon." Then I added, "I'm okay. More than okay." I set the phone face down, and as I started the engine, one small thought stayed with me, quiet but certain. Ethan didn't do this impulsively. He wanted witnesses, and somehow, I still didn't know why. That was the part I hadn't uncovered yet. The drive back to my apartment was only 15 minutes, but it felt longer. Not because I was falling apart, mostly because my mind was moving through memories in a different way now, like someone walking back through a house and noticing what they had ignored for years. I had met Ethan when I was 24. I was working my first real job as a junior coordinator at a corporate events office downtown. Nothing glamorous, but I liked the structure. The checklists, the schedules, the calm satisfaction of making something run smoothly. Ethan worked in medical sales. He was confident in that polished way, always dressed like he was about to meet someone important. On our first date, he sat across from me at a coffee shop and listened very carefully while I talked about wanting to eventually start my own small planning business. At the time, I thought it was interest. Now looking back, it felt more like he was collecting details. Within the first year, my life began adjusting around him in ways that seemed small. He didn't like my closest college friends, said they were stuck in old habits, so I saw them less. He thought my apartment was inconvenient for him, too far from his work, so I moved. He said my business idea was risky, that I needed stability first. So I placed the dream neatly on a shelf and told myself it was temporary. That's what adults did, I thought. Compromise. But over time, I realized most of the compromising was mine. Even my mother noticed. The previous Christmas, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while Ethan was in the living room talking loudly with my uncle about his promotion. "Claire," she asked softly, "does he make you happy?" I remember smiling quickly, like the question was unnecessary. Of course, we're getting married. But happiness wasn't the word. Comfort, maybe. Investment. Habit. The engagement had happened early, only a year and a half into the relationship. Ethan proposed during his parents' anniversary dinner, standing up in front of their extended family with phones already raised. I said yes because the room was watching. Afterward, everyone told me how lucky I was. Ethan loved moments like that. He loved an audience. Wedding planning was more of the same. I wanted something simple, a small outdoor ceremony. Ethan wanted a ballroom downtown, expensive, formal, full of people I barely knew. These are important connections, he told me, for our future. But he always meant his future. When I pushed back, even gently, he would look at me like I was being unreasonable. Why are you making this harder than it needs to be? Eventually, I stopped pushing. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting my own instincts. Even small things became his domain. At dinners, he would correct me casually if I mispronounced something, always with a smile so it looked harmless. He complimented me in public, but in private he found small faults. My tone, my clothes, the way I laughed too loudly sometimes. And then there was money. He earned more than I did, and he made sure it stayed noticeable. He paid for trips, dinners, gifts. But every gesture came with something unspoken, a kind of quiet control. Whenever I offered to split things, he would wave it off. "Don't worry, I've got it." What he really meant was, "I decide." By the time I pulled into my parking space that afternoon, I sat in the car for a long moment without moving. 4 years. And somehow, I had gotten smaller inside them. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, a text message. "This isn't the reaction I expected. We need to talk." I stared at it. Then, for the first time in years, I did something unfamiliar. I didn't respond. I left the phone in my lap and just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the engine. That evening, Marissa came over with a bottle of wine and the kind of expression that meant she had been holding her opinions in for a long time. She sat down on my couch and said simply, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the restaurant, the way Ethan asked for the window table, the way his friends were positioned nearby like they were waiting for a show. And when I finished, Marissa nodded slowly, her voice careful. "I hate to say it, but I'm not surprised." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "I've been watching you disappear for a while, Claire. I just didn't know when you'd be ready to see it." Her words settled heavily, not as blame, but as truth. And before I could answer, my phone buzzed again on the table. Another message. Longer this time, more impatient. I didn't pick it up yet. I just watched the screen light up and waited. I left the phone where it was. Marissa didn't touch her wine right away. She just watched me carefully, like she was making sure I wasn't about to break apart in a way I didn't feel. After a moment, she asked, "What did he want from that lunch, Claire?" I thought about it. "I think he wanted a reaction," I said. "Something public." Marissa's mouth tightened. Of course he did. That night, more messages came. Ethan's tone shifted quickly. First confusion, then irritation, then something sharper. Sunday morning. Silent treatment isn't mature. Sunday evening. We need to talk like adults. Monday. People are asking questions. You need to help me explain this. I didn't answer any of them, not because I was trying to punish him, because for the first time I wasn't arranging my behavior around what made him feel in control. The silence felt clean, like stepping out of a room that had been too loud for years. While Ethan kept texting, I started doing something practical. Untangling. The wedding was scheduled for early spring, about 6 months away. Deposits had been paid. Venue, catering, photography, florals. And almost all of it was under my name. Ethan had insisted it was simpler paperwork. Now I understood it differently. On Tuesday morning, I called the hotel ballroom. The coordinator recognized my voice immediately. "Claire," she said gently, "how are you?" I kept my tone steady. "The wedding isn't happening." There was a pause, then a quiet exhale. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do you want to talk about options?" "The deposit is non-refundable, correct?" "Yes," she admitted, "but we can offer credit for a future event." I looked out my kitchen window while I spoke, watching a neighbor walk their dog. "Actually," I said, "I may use it sooner than we thought." The coordinator sounded surprised. "For what kind of event?" "A small celebration," I replied. "Something different." When I hung up, Marissa raised her eyebrows slightly. "You're serious about that?" "I think I am," I said. "Not as revenge, not as drama, as a way to define what happened before Ethan could do it for me." Over the next day, I made more calls. The caterer was understanding. The photographer offered a partial refund. The florist, a man named Luis, who had spent months patiently revising arrangements to match Ethan's constant preferences, said quietly, "I wondered when this would end." I paused. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "You never seemed excited, Claire. You seemed managed." That word stayed with me. Managed. By Wednesday evening, I began organizing practical details. And that was when something shifted. The wedding planning documents were stored in a shared folder Ethan and I both had access to. Guest lists, vendor contracts, seating drafts. I opened the master guest spreadsheet to start sorting cancellations. But halfway down, I noticed another file. One I hadn't created. The title was simple, Priority Contacts. Notify immediately, I clicked. About 40 names. Mostly Ethan's colleagues, friends, a few extended family members I barely knew. Next to each name was a note. Send wedding update same day. My stomach tightened slightly. I checked the document history. Ethan had created it 2 weeks before the restaurant lunch. 2 weeks. Meaning the breakup hadn't been spontaneous. It had been scheduled. I opened another file, a draft message, written formally, almost like a press statement. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Claire. He described himself as thoughtful, measured, brave, and me as someone not aligned with his values and goals. I stared at the screen for a long time. Marissa leaned over my shoulder, reading silently. "That's," she started. "Calculated," I finished. I kept looking. Deeper in the folder were messages Ethan had sent that morning, to one of his friends. "Today's the day. Be at the restaurant at 12:30. I want witnesses. Witnesses." Another response came back. "I'll record it." My hands went still on the keyboard. Recording. I thought back to his friend at the next table, phone angled strangely. It hadn't been casual. It had been staged. Marissa's voice was low. "He wanted footage. I nodded once. The room felt very quiet. And then I saw another message thread, a name I didn't recognize, sent the night before. Tomorrow I'm ending things. I can't wait to finally be free and start our next chapter. The name was Lena. I didn't know any Lena, but Ethan did. Well enough to promise a future. I sat back slowly, breathing in through my nose. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a transition plan, an exit campaign, prepared witnesses, prepared narrative, prepared replacement, and the only thing he hadn't prepared for was me staying calm. The laptop screen dimmed slightly as it sat idle. I didn't close it. I didn't move. I just stared at the files and understood that I was only seeing the beginning. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was panicking, because my mind was reorganizing things, like a room being cleared after years of clutter. The next morning, I made coffee, opened my laptop again, and started a folder of my own. Nothing dramatic, just labeled and dated. If Ethan was building a story, then facts were the only thing that mattered. I wrote down simple steps, almost the way I would plan an event. Step 1. Save everything before access changes. Screenshots, document histories, message threads. Step 2. Build a timeline, not feelings, dates. Step 3. Do nothing impulsive. Silence first. Order first. Marissa watched me from the kitchen table. "You're very calm," she said carefully. "I'm being careful," I replied. There was a difference. By Thursday, Ethan's messages had become sharper. "You're embarrassing me. This party thing is unhinged. You need to talk to me before you ruin your reputation." I read them all. Then I left them unanswered. That silence wasn't weakness, it was boundary. That afternoon, Marissa called me from work, her voice tight. "I heard something." "What is it?" I asked. "One of my coworkers knows someone dating one of Ethan's friends. Apparently, they've been talking about Saturday." I stayed quiet. Marissa continued. "He's been telling people for months that you're emotionally unstable." My hand paused over the mug I was holding. "What?" "He told them you're clingy, controlling, that you throw fits, that he was afraid to end things privately." The air in my apartment felt suddenly thinner. "That isn't true," I said. "I know," Marissa replied firmly. "That's the point. He's been building that story." I sat down slowly. The restaurant, the witnesses, the recording. It wasn't just humiliation, it was evidence. He wanted a public reaction he could point to later, a performance that proved his narrative. Except, he didn't get it. Marissa exhaled. "And now he's scrambling. He's calling people saying you're in shock, that the breakdown is coming." He needed me to fall apart. He needed the story to match. When we hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. I thought about all the times Ethan had told me what other people supposedly thought. "My friends think you're too intense. My mom says you're emotional. My coworkers think you don't handle pressure well." I had believed him. I had adjusted. Now I realized he may have been creating those perceptions from the start, brick by brick. That evening, I went back into the shared accounts. Phone records were still accessible through our family plan dashboard. I wasn't looking for content, just patterns. And the pattern was clear. Calls to Lena didn't begin last week. They began in early summer. Short at first, then longer, then almost daily. 5 months. While we were still planning seating charts, while he was still tasting cake samples with me. The public breakup wasn't an ending, it was the handoff. I added it to the timeline. Date, frequency, growth, no adjectives, just numbers. Then I started drafting the party invitation. Not an announcement, not an explanation, just a simple line. "Please join me to celebrate a new beginning." No mention of Ethan, no accusations, no emotional framing. Let people ask if they wanted the truth. I wasn't going to campaign. I wasn't going to defend myself loudly. Facts didn't require volume. Marissa read over my shoulder. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," I said. The party wasn't to expose him, it was to reclaim space. But I knew certain people would come. Curiosity spreads quickly in social circles like his. And if someone asked me what happened, I would answer calmly. Not with anger, with documentation. The venue was already paid for. The date was set for 3 weeks out. Enough time for word to travel. Enough time for Ethan to feel uncertainty. That night, another message came from him. Longer than the rest. More careful, almost threatening. Whatever you're planning, remember I have my side too. Don't make me respond. I read it once, then deleted it. I placed the phone face down on the counter, and for the first time, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not sadness, just readiness. Because the story Ethan had written required me to collapse, and I wasn't going to. I turned back to my laptop. The timeline was growing, and I had a sense there was still more I hadn't uncovered yet. The 3 weeks passed quickly. Not in a blur, exactly. More like a steady rhythm of tasks. Guest confirmations, simple decor choices, phone calls with vendors. Each small decision felt like returning something to myself. The ballroom downtown looked nothing like the reception Ethan had wanted. No white roses, no rigid seating charts. Instead, warm colors, soft lights, sunflowers, and seasonal arrangements that felt honest, a little imperfect, and entirely mine. People arrived quietly at first, then steadily. Friends I hadn't seen in years, co-workers from my early days, family members who hugged me longer than usual. It didn't feel like gossip, it felt like people coming back. Marissa stood near the entrance, calm and watchful. "You're doing well," she said. "I'm doing what's next," I replied. By 8 o'clock, the room was full. The mood was gentle. Light music, conversation, familiar laughter, and eventually, as I knew it would, the question surfaced. A friend pulled me aside. "So, what really happened?" I didn't volunteer anything dramatic. I just said the truth. "He ended things publicly. He invited friends to witness it." Eyebrows lifted. A pause. And if they asked more, I gave more. The drafted message, the planned recording, the other woman, always calm, always factual. Evidence only when requested. Phones were passed quietly from hand to hand as people looked at screenshots. No shouting, no spectacle, just the slow collapse of a story that couldn't survive reality. Around 9:30, I noticed small shifts. One of Ethan's acquaintances standing stiffly near the bar, speaking in a low voice to someone else. A woman I recognized from the restaurant lunch staring down at her drink, expression unsettled. People weren't celebrating his downfall. They were recalibrating what they had believed. Then, a little after 10, the room changed. It wasn't silence, it was attention. I saw Ethan before he saw me. He stood in the doorway in a button-down shirt, scanning the room like he was trying to locate the center of control. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved quickly. When he spotted me, he walked straight over. Conversations lowered around us, not in excitement, in caution. "Claire." His voice was restrained but sharp underneath. "What is this?" I faced him fully. "I'm hosting a gathering," I said evenly. "You're not invited." His nostrils flared. "You're trying to destroy me." "I haven't tried to do anything," I replied. "I've answered questions when asked." His voice rose slightly. "You went through my files." "Our files," I corrected. "The shared folder, the one you left open." His face tightened. "This is insane. You're proving exactly what I told people." I let a short pause sit between us. Then I said calmly, "Ethan, look around." He hesitated. "Look at the faces in this room. These are people who knew me before you. Do I look unstable to them?" His eyes moved reluctantly. What he saw wasn't chaos. It was quiet disapproval. People watching him with discomfort, not me. I kept my voice steady. "You planned the restaurant. You invited witnesses. Your friend recorded it." His mouth opened, then closed. "You drafted messages before the lunch even happened," I continued. "And you were speaking to Lena for months while we were still engaged." A few people nearby inhaled softly. Ethan's face flushed. You don't understand. I understand enough, I said. I wasn't angry. I wasn't pleading. I was defining reality. You wanted a public breakdown so you could justify a story you'd been telling. When I didn't give you that, you lost control. His hands flexed at his sides. This party is unhinged, he said tightly. It's calm, I replied, and that's what bothers you. For a moment, he stood there, surrounded by people who were no longer receptive to his performance. His voice dropped. You're making a mistake. I nodded once. Then you should leave. He looked at me, searching for something, a crack, a reaction. He didn't find it. Finally, he turned and walked back toward the entrance. No dramatic exit, just a man leaving a room where his narrative no longer worked. The atmosphere didn't erupt after he left. It simply exhaled, and I stood there quietly, feeling something settle into place. Not victory, just completion. After Ethan left, the party didn't turn into a celebration of him being exposed. People went back to their conversations, but the tone had changed. Quieter, more thoughtful, like everyone had just watched something important and was trying to place it in the right category. A woman approached me near the dessert table. I recognized her from the restaurant. She had been seated with Ethan's group that day. Her name was Rachel. I only knew it because Ethan had introduced her once, quickly, like she didn't matter. Claire, she said, voice strained. I need to apologize. I waited. She looked down at her hands. When Ethan told us what he was planning, he framed it like support. Like he needed witnesses because he was afraid you'd explode if he ended it privately. I didn't respond right away. I let her finish. I didn't know about the recording, she continued. I didn't know about Lena? I swear I didn't. If I had... Her eyes watered, and she swallowed hard. I thought we were helping a friend get out of something unhealthy, and now I feel sick. I was part of something cruel. I nodded once. I understand, I said calmly. That was the point. He wanted it to look justified. Rachel exhaled shakily. The way you acted at lunch, she said. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It didn't match what he'd been saying, not even close. I didn't take pleasure in her discomfort, but I noted the pattern. His story couldn't survive calm reality. Over the next week, the aftermath arrived in small, ordinary ways, not dramatic headlines, just shifts in people's behavior. A mutual acquaintance who used to greet Ethan warmly at networking events stopped returning his calls. A coworker of mine mentioned, carefully, that Ethan had been trying to explain himself to someone in her department. Marissa forwarded me a message from a friend of a friend. He keeps insisting she's going to snap any day now. Even after everyone saw me composed at the party, he still needed the breakdown to arrive. He needed time to prove himself right. But there was no breakdown coming, because I wasn't performing. The most telling confirmation came from someone I hadn't expected. Ethan's younger sister, Holly, called me 2 days after the party. I almost didn't answer, but her name stayed on the screen, and something in me decided it was safe enough. Claire, she said softly, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. It's okay, I replied. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. I heard what happened, and I heard some of what Ethan has been telling people. I stayed quiet. Holly continued. He's saying he was afraid of how you'd react, that you were unstable. I let a short pause sit. And do you believe that? I asked. No, she said immediately. Not for a second. Her voice tightened. I've watched you for 4 years at family gatherings. You were never unstable. You were accommodating. You looked like you were trying not to take up space. That word again. Space. I'm sorry, she added. I'm sorry none of us said anything sooner. I didn't tell her it was fine. I didn't tell her it didn't matter. I just said, thank you for calling. Before hanging up, she added one more thing. My mom is asking questions now. She's starting to connect dots. Ethan's been furious. I understood why. If his own family began questioning his story, the foundation weakened quickly. Over the following month, the consequences stayed realistic and steady. Ethan's circle shifted away from him, not because of a public smear campaign, but because they had watched him walk into a room uninvited and try to accuse me of being unstable while I stood there calm. They had watched evidence match my words, not his. Lena, the woman he'd been speaking with, didn't become his new chapter the way he'd planned. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard she ended it after learning how he'd orchestrated the breakup. Not out of loyalty to me, out of self-preservation. People don't like being the next person in someone's pattern. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to move forward like nothing happened. But stories travel. Especially the kind built on witnesses. He had insisted on an audience, and he got one. Just not the ending he wanted. One evening, about 6 weeks later, I received an email from the hotel venue. A final statement showing the deposit credit fully used and closed. Everything tied off cleanly. I stared at it for a moment, then saved it into my folder. Not because I needed it, because I liked completion. Marissa came by that night with takeout and sat across from me at my kitchen table. "So," she asked gently, "what now?" I looked around my apartment. It was quiet, orderly, mine again. "I start building what I paused," I said. And for the first time, the sentence didn't feel like hope. It felt like a plan. The months after everything happened weren't loud. They were steady. Life didn't transform overnight into something perfect. It just became quieter, clearer, more honest. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming anymore. Ethan tried once or twice through mutual acquaintances to send something along, a vague apology, a suggestion that we talk like adults. I didn't respond. Silence was not avoidance. It was a boundary. I focused instead on practical resets. I canceled remaining wedding accounts, closed shared logins, changed passwords, removed my name from anything that wasn't mine. Each task was small, but together they felt like walking back into my own space. On a Sunday morning in late November, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching rain slide slowly down the glass. No noise, no waiting for someone else's mood, just quiet. That was when I opened an old folder on my laptop, the one labeled Business Ideas. Notes I had written years ago, before everything became about compromise. Event planning concepts, client outlines, little drafts of the life I had once wanted. I spent that morning reading through them calmly, not with regret, but with a strange sense of return. Within 3 months, I started taking small freelance work. A retirement dinner, a nonprofit fundraiser, a friend's baby shower. Nothing glamorous, just honest projects where my decisions were mine. By the following summer, I had more inquiries than I expected. People talk about reliability, about calm competence. The same steadiness Ethan once tried to shrink in me was now something others valued. Marissa told me once, over coffee, he didn't see what he was sitting across from. Maybe, or maybe he did. Maybe that was the problem. I heard occasional updates about Ethan through distant circles. Not dramatic downfall, just slow consequences, professional connections cooling, friends keeping distance. The story of the restaurant and the recording still followed him in quiet ways. You can't insist on witnesses and then control what they remember. Eventually, I stopped caring, not out of bitterness, out of disinterest. My attention belonged elsewhere. One evening, almost a year after that Saturday lunch, I stayed late in my small rented office space. Nothing fancy, just a desk, a few sample books, and a whiteboard with upcoming events listed neatly. Before leaving, I turned off the lamp, locked the door, and stood for a moment in the hallway. I thought about how certain endings arrive disguised as humiliation, and how calm can sometimes be the strongest refusal. On the walk to my car, the air was cold and clean. I breathed in slowly. Then I went home, made dinner, folded laundry, and listened to soft music while the apartment settled around me. Peace isn't loud, it's orderly. It's knowing you don't have to perform for anyone. A few weeks ago, I got a message from an old acquaintance, a woman I barely knew, asking if we could talk privately. She said she was engaged to someone who reminded her of Ethan. Public charm, private control. She wasn't sure if she was imagining it. I told her she wasn't imagining the need to pay attention. Sometimes people don't need advice. They just need permission to trust what they already feel. And I realized quietly that there may be more stories like mine. More people standing at tables, being watched, expected to break. If you're listening right now and something in this story feels familiar, I hope you know this. Calm is not weakness. Clarity is not cruelty. It is the beginning of getting your life back. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story held your attention, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? 2 more popular stories will be waiting for you next.